I haven't looked at a painting in 33 years. Not in museums, not in hotels, not even the framed photos gathering dust in my own hallway. Because in February 1991, my boarding party found 17 oil paintings on an abandoned ship in the Persian Gulf. And what stared back from those canvases wasn't paint. It was hunger. I threw 17 paintings into the Persian Gulf on February 23, 1991, and watched them float back to our ship against a current that should have carried them to Iran. When we hauled them aboard the second time, the figures in the paintings had changed. They weren't anonymous subjects anymore. They were us. The door was already open. We just hadn't realized we were the ones being invited through. The Persian Gulf in '91 was a graveyard disguised as an ocean. Oil slicks caught fire if you looked at them wrong, and the water itself seemed angry, thick, black, unnatural. After 6 weeks of sorties and the constant threat of Scud missiles, you'd think we'd gotten used to the weight pressing down on everything aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. But fear has a way of evolving when you're trapped in a steel box floating over water that burns if someone drops a cigarette. I was Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb, Electronic Warfare Specialist. Fancy title for the guy who spent 16-hour shifts staring at green dots that might be enemy contacts or might be dolphins having a bad day. 22 years old and convinced I was immortal. Right up until February 17th, 0300 hours, when immortality died screaming. You ever notice how the ocean has different voices? During the day, it's all white noise and engine vibration, background static you learn to ignore. But at 3 a.m, when the bombing runs pause and the world holds its breath, the Gulf whispers. That night, it was whispering names I recognized. Webb, you seeing this shit? Lieutenant Morrison's voice cut through my caffeine-induced trance. His coffee breath mixed with recycled air, creating that special submarine smell of desperation and Navy instinct. My radar screen showed exactly what it had shown for the past 4 hours. Nothing. Clean sweep, no contacts within our designated patrol sector. Negative on radar, sir. Scope's clean. Then what the hell is that? Morrison pointed through the reinforced porthole. 300 meters off our starboard bow, a ship blazed with lights like a carnival had gotten lost at sea. Running lights, deck lights, even what looked like Christmas decorations strung along the superstructure. In a war zone, at 3 a.m. You know what was wrong with that picture? Everything. No radar signature. My equipment should have been screaming. No thermal reading. The infrared was stone cold. No radio chatter. Comms was dead silent except for our own traffic. Just lights where no lights should exist, on a ship that apparently didn't want to be detected, but was advertising its presence like a neon sign in the desert. The bridge transformed from sleepy night watch to controlled chaos in about 15 seconds. Captain Hayes materialized like he'd been summoned by some sixth sense, which, knowing Hayes, wasn't impossible. 30-year Navy veteran with instincts sharpened by 3 wars and countless nights like this one. The man could smell trouble through solid steel. How long has she been there? His voice carried that particular edge of command that made junior officers stand straighter. Just appeared, sir. One sweep, nothing. Next sweep, lights. Ships don't materialize, Webb. You missed her approach. Except I hadn't. I'd been glued to that screen since midnight, hopped up on Navy coffee strong enough to wake the dead and paranoid enough to jump at shadows. That vessel had appeared between one radar sweep and the next. materializing from black water like it had been waiting just below the surface for us to notice. Chief Kowalski's voice crackled from the communications station. "Captain, I'm getting zero response. No distress signal, no identification beacon, no radio chatter. She's running completely dark except for those lights." Hayes raised his binoculars, studying the mystery ship in the green glow of our instrument panels. His face could have been carved from granite. "Distance 300 meters and holding position. She's not drifting. Someone's maintaining station. In the middle of a war zone." Broadcasting her position to every pilot and missile battery within 50 miles, Hayes lowered the binoculars, decision crystallizing in his expression. "Prep a boarding party. Full tactical 6 men. If she's abandoned, I need to know why. If she's not..." He didn't finish, but we all understood. An unidentified vessel maintaining position this close to a carrier battle group wasn't just suspicious. It was a potential torpedo launch platform, a floating bomb, or worse. In the Gulf, paranoia wasn't a disorder. It was survival instinct. You'd think someone would have asked the obvious question. Why not just radio for identification and blow her out of the water if she didn't respond? But standing orders were clear. Investigate first, destroy second. Intelligence wanted to know what Saddam was floating around out there before we turned it into scrap metal. Should have just sunk her. Should have put 2 torpedoes into her belly and watched her burn. But hindsight's always 20/20 when you're looking back from hell. I wasn't supposed to be on that boarding party. Electronic warfare specialists typically stay behind their screens, safe in the bowels of the ship where the biggest danger is eye strain and too much caffeine. But Lieutenant Morrison had volunteered me for 2 reasons. I spoke passable Arabic, which might be useful if we found Iraqi civilians, and I had what he diplomatically called situational awareness. What he meant was that I worried about everything, which made me good at spotting things that didn't belong. My worry was screaming. The Zodiac bounced across oil-slick swells toward the mystery vessel, its engines barely audible over the sound of water slapping fiberglass. 6 of us crammed into the inflatable boat. Lieutenant Morrison commanding, me, Chief Kowalski, with 20 years of boarding experience, and 3 sailors from ship security, Reynolds, Diaz, and Hutchinson, who couldn't have been more than 19 and kept checking his rifle like it might evaporate. "Easy, Hutch," Diaz muttered, adjusting his own gear. "Probably just smugglers who saw us coming and decided to take a swim. But smugglers don't maintain perfect station keeping, and they sure as hell don't illuminate their vessels like Broadway theaters." As we approached, details became visible through the pre-dawn gloom. The ship was maybe 150 feet long, converted fishing trawler by the look of her. Rust-streaked hull, commercial fishing gear still mounted on the stern, but modifications everywhere. Better radar, upgraded communications array, cargo booms rated for heavier loads than fish. Greek registry, according to the faded lettering on her stern. Cassandra. Cassandra. "Anybody know Greek mythology?" Morrison asked as we pulled alongside. "Cassandra could see the future," I said, but nobody believed her warnings. Morrison looked at me over his rifle sights. Freaking perfect. The ladder up was solid, professionally welded. Morrison went first, weapon ready, flashlight cutting through shadows. One by one we followed, boots clanging on metal rungs that sang slightly in the Gulf wind. The deck was wrong, not visibly wrong. Nothing broken, no bodies, no obvious signs of violence. Just wrong in that indefinable way that makes your skin crawl without giving your brain specific reasons. A steaming cup of coffee sat on a cargo crate. still hot enough to see vapor rising in the cool air. A lit cigarette balanced on the edge of an improvised ashtray, ash impossibly long and unbroken despite the wind that should have scattered it. "Hello?" Morrison's voice carried across empty deck space. "United States Navy. Anyone aboard?" The only response was the steady purr of diesel engines and something else. Music drifting up from below deck. Classical, melancholy, violins weeping in a minor key that seemed designed to make you homesick for places you'd never been. We cleared the bridge first, empty but recently occupied. Navigation charts spread across the plotting table showed a course from Bahrain to Kuwait City, with waypoints marked in careful pencil. The radio crackled softly with static, volume turned low. Someone had been monitoring maritime frequencies. The ship's log lay open to February 17th, today's date. The last entry consisted of one word written repeatedly down the entire page in increasingly erratic handwriting. Watching, 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 watching. 23 iterations, each one slightly different, like someone fighting to maintain control of their own hand. "Sir," Reynolds called from the stern rail, "you need to see this." The cargo hold doors gaped open like a mouth. We descended into darkness that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams, air thick with the scent of oil paint mixed with something else. Copper, fear, sweat, and underneath it all, the ozone smell of electrical storms. Professional packing crates filled the hold, dozens of them arranged with military precision. Shipping manifests in French were tacked to each one. Destination: private collector, Kuwait City. Contents: fine art, European masters, 18th and 19th century. Estimated value per manifest: $3.7 million. "War profiteering," Morrison said, voice tight with disgust. "Probably looted Iraqi museums during the invasion." A door slammed somewhere above us. We froze, weapons up, fingers on triggers. The classical music stopped mid-phrase. The diesel engines died with a mechanical sigh. Sudden silence pressed down like physical weight, broken only by the gentle creaking of hull plates adjusting to swells. "Hutchinson, Reynolds, topside now," Morrison whispered. "Secure the deck and report." They disappeared up the ladder, boots clanging. 30 seconds later, Reynolds' voice crackled through our handheld radios. "Deck secure, sir." "But the captain's quarters door is locked from the inside." "Locked when we cleared the bridge?" "Negative, sir. Door was open when I checked it personally. I looked inside. Empty cabin, unmade bunk." Morrison's eyes reflected our flashlight beams, pupils dilated with adrenaline. "Webb, you and Kowalski start documenting these crates. Full inventory." "Diaz, with me. We're having another conversation with whoever's playing hide and seek." They climbed toward deck level, leaving Kowalski and me alone in the hold with 17 wooden crates and a silence that felt like being watched by invisible eyes. The first crate we opened contained 3 paintings wrapped in white cotton cloth like burial shrouds. Kowalski pulled the largest free, and even under harsh LED illumination, it was breathtaking. A landscape, rolling hills stretching toward distant mountains, a small village nestled in a valley, storm clouds gathering with the kind of detail that made you want to seek shelter. "Museum quality," Kowalski whispered, running calloused fingers along the gilded frame. "Must be worth—" "Don't touch the canvas." "Why?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound crazy. Just that crawling sensation you get when something fundamental is wrong, but your conscious mind hasn't identified the threat yet. Ever notice how painted eyes seem to follow you around a room? It's an optical illusion, a trick of perspective and light. But these weren't portraits with eyes. They were landscapes, still lifes, religious scenes with figures facing away from the viewer. So why did I feel like something in them was staring back? We documented 17 paintings total, each one a masterpiece that belonged in the Louvre or the Metropolitan. Pastoral scenes that seemed to breathe with their own weather. Religious imagery so detailed you could read the Latin inscriptions on the angels' robes. Still lifes that looked fresh enough to pluck fruit from the painted tables. The manifests claimed 18th and 19th century origins, but something was off about the age. Oil paintings from that era should show some wear, cracking in the paint, yellowing of varnish, the subtle patina that comes with centuries of existence. These looked like they'd been completed yesterday. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Webb, we've got a problem up here." "What kind of problem, sir?" "The kind where doors lock themselves and coffee stays hot for 6 hours. Kowalski and I exchanged glances. In the beam of our flashlights, the paintings seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the paint was still wet and settling. We climbed topside to find Morrison and Diaz standing outside the captain's quarters, both looking like they'd seen something that violated the basic laws of physics. "Door was definitely open," Diaz said. "I checked the cabin personally. Small space, nowhere to hide. Now it's locked from inside, and we can hear movement." "Movement?" "Like someone pacing, back and forth, very regular. But when we knock..." Morrison demonstrated, rapping knuckles against the metal door. The pacing stopped instantly. Complete silence. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, it resumed. Same rhythm, same pattern. "Could be jury-rigged," Kowalski suggested. "Mechanical device, make it sound occupied when it's not." But that didn't explain the coffee, or the cigarette, or the way the ship's log had been written in while we were below deck. I'd counted 23 entries before. Now there were 25. The door opened as we watched. No sound of locks disengaging, no creak of hinges. It simply swung inward to reveal a cramped cabin containing a narrow bunk, a fold-down desk, and a shelf of books in what looked like Greek. No person visible, but the bunk was rumpled like someone had been sleeping in it recently. A painting hung on the bulkhead above the pillow, a portrait of a woman in dark Victorian dress, standing in what appeared to be the same cabin we were examining. Same bunk, same desk, same arrangement of books on the shelf. But in the painted version, someone slept under the covers. A vague human shape, face turned away from the artist. "Self-portrait of the room," Hutchinson said, peering over Morrison's shoulder. "Weird thing to paint." "Look closer," Morrison said quietly. I did. In the painting's version of the fold-down desk sat an open logbook. The page was clearly visible, covered with writing. The same word, repeated in increasingly frantic handwriting. Watching. But here's what made my blood turn to ice water. In the real cabin, the desk was closed. Empty surface, nothing on it. The logbook was in the wheelhouse, 40 feet away. We found the crew manifest in a folder tucked behind the radio equipment. 7 names, all Greek, with passport photos attached. Normal working men, weathered faces, competent hands, the kind of career merchant sailors you'd find on commercial vessels from Piraeus to Singapore. But the photographs were wrong. Not obviously wrong. No supernatural distortions or obvious forgeries. Just wrong in a way that made you look twice, then 3 times, trying to figure out what your subconscious had noticed. They were all looking at the same spot. 7 different men, photographed at different times for official documents, all staring at the exact same point somewhere past the camera. Not at the lens, through it, towards something behind the photographer that had captured their attention completely. "Probably coincidence," Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Diaz found something else. "Sir, engine room's clean, but someone's been drawing on the walls." The engine compartment was spotless. No oil stains, no rust, no accumulated grime you'd expect on a working vessel. But covering every vertical surface were charcoal drawings. Crude stick figures arranged in rows, hundreds of them, all facing the same direction like an audience watching an invisible stage. At the center of the largest wall, drawn with more care and detail, was an empty picture frame. Just an ornate rectangle with nothing inside it. "Boredom," Morrison said, but he was studying the drawings with the intensity of someone trying to decode a message. "Long voyages, nothing to do. Sailors get creative." Kowalski found the notebook tucked behind the main engine block, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture. Water damaged despite the precautions, pages stuck together, but we could separate them carefully and read most of the entries. Written in English, which was odd for a Greek crew. Handwriting that started neat and deteriorated over time. Day 3. The paintings speak when no one is listening. Dmitri swears he heard Greek folk songs at 0200, but when we investigated, the cargo hold was silent. Day 5. Miguel reported seeing someone walking in the landscape painting, a figure moving from the village toward the hills. When we checked, the painting was unchanged, but Miguel refuses to go below deck alone. Day 8. They're getting closer. The figure in the landscape has moved. Giannis measured. It's definitely closer to the foreground than before. We're considering throwing the paintings overboard. Day 11. We tried disposing of one painting, threw it into the Gulf during morning watch. By evening, it was back in its crate, dry and undamaged. No explanation how it returned to the ship. Day 13. Attempted to burn them. Doused 3 canvases with diesel fuel, applied direct flame. The fire went out immediately. Paintings were completely unharmed, but now they know we tried to destroy them. Day 14. Kostas cut his hand on a rusted latch while securing cargo. When he steadied himself against a crate, his bloody handprint smeared the protective cloth. The painting underneath went cold to the touch. He said it felt like pressing his palm against a corpse. Day 16. I understand now. These aren't paintings, they're windows, and something on the other side is looking through, learning about us, preparing. The final entry was different. Careful block letters, like someone fighting to maintain control. We are in the paintings now. They are on the ship. Here's what should have happened. We should have radioed for a full investigation team, cordoned off the area, and waited for people trained in handling anomalous situations. But war makes you stupid. Makes you think standard operating procedures apply to everything, that training and firepower can solve any problem. Morrison made the call that doomed us all. We're taking everything back to the Lincoln. Full documentation, complete chain of custody, then it becomes intelligence's headache. It took 4 hours to transfer the crates using the ship's crane. By the time we finished, Dawn was painting the Gulf the color of old blood, and the Cassandra sat empty on swells that reflected light like hammered metal. Morrison wanted to scuttle her, put a few rounds below the waterline and watch her join the other wrecks littering the Gulf floor. But Captain Hayes overruled him, citing international maritime law and the need for proper documentation. So we left her floating, abandoned, empty, or so we thought. Standard protocol for recovered contraband was immediate secure storage pending investigation. No viewing, no handling, no admiring the pretty pictures until lawyers and intelligence analysts determined legal ownership and strategic value. Admiral Garrett had other plans. Distinguished Naval Academy graduate with a master's degree in European art history, the kind of officer who collected rare books and attended gallery openings during shore leave. He'd heard about our cultural recovery operation and wanted the paintings properly assessed by qualified personnel. Translation: he wanted to look at them. They set up a private viewing in the officer's wardroom, supposedly for professional evaluation. Admiral Garrett, Captain Hayes, department heads, and me, Morrison's cultural liaison, in case anyone needed historical context or translation services. You want to know the truth about military leadership? Half of it consists of highly educated people pretending they're not impressed by impressive things. These paintings? They impressed the hell out of everyone. Magnificent, Admiral Garrett kept saying, moving from canvas to canvas with the reverence of someone visiting a cathedral. Look at the brushwork, the use of light and shadow. These have to be authentic period pieces. All 17 paintings hung along the wardroom walls, properly illuminated by track lighting that brought out colors so vivid they seemed to pulse. The landscape with its approaching storm dominated one wall, clouds rendered so realistically you could almost smell rain. Religious scenes glowed with divine light that made you want to kneel. Still, lives looked fresh enough to pluck grapes from painted bowls. "What's your assessment, Webb?" Captain Hayes asked. "Your family's gallery background gives you some expertise." "Had a gallery, sir. Closed when my dad got sick. I studied a still life, elegant table setting with fruit, wine bottle, leather-bound book, and what looked like sheet music. These appear authentic, but there's something off about the aging. 18th century originals should show more wear patterns. Perhaps previous owners took exceptional care," Admiral Garrett suggested. But he was staring at the landscape with an intensity that made me nervous. That's when Hutchinson said it. Poor, observant Hutchinson with his 19-year-old eyes that caught details everyone else missed. "Sir, wasn't there a wine bottle in that still life before?" We all looked. The table setting showed fruit, book, and sheet music. No wine bottle. "You're mistaken, sailor," Morrison said quickly, but his voice carried a warning edge. "No, sir. I specifically remember the label was in French, and I was trying to read, 'You are mistaken.'" Hutchinson shut up, but others were looking now, really examining the paintings with the kind of attention that reveals discrepancies. The landscape storm clouds, hadn't they been further from the village before? The religious scene with angels, weren't there 3 figures initially, not 2? "Probably the lighting," Admiral Garrett said, stepping back from the landscape. "Different angles reveal different details. Chiaroscuro technique. Masters like Caravaggio used it extensively." His voice carried forced casualness, the tone of someone convincing himself as much as his audience. But his eyes never left the painted storm clouds, and his fingers twitched like he wanted to reach out and touch the canvas. "Such a shame to lock these away during the investigation," he murmured, not to us, but to the paintings themselves. "Months of bureaucratic red tape while masterpieces sit in darkness. They need to be seen. They need to be appreciated." Something in his tone made Captain Hayes step closer. The Admiral's voice had lost its command authority, replaced by something softer, more reverent, almost worshipful. Sir, protocol requires secure storage of recovered contraband pending. Contraband? Admiral Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. James, this isn't contraband. This is art. This is beauty that's been locked away in darkness for God knows how long. He leaned closer to the landscape, nose almost touching paint that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Can you hear it? The music and the brushstrokes. The wardroom was silent except for ventilation hum and distant engine vibration. I don't hear anything, Admiral. Of course you don't. Garrett's smile was distant, unfocused, like someone listening to voices only he could perceive. You have to really listen. They've been alone so long, starving in storage crates. It's not right to hide beauty. Beauty should be shared. He turned to face us, but his eyes remained fixed on something none of us could see. When he spoke, it was with the authority of command, but the words felt like they were coming from somewhere else. We'll make them available to the crew. Boost morale during this difficult deployment. 1 painting per department, carefully monitored, full documentation. They deserve to be seen. This wasn't Admiral Garrett giving orders. This was Admiral Garrett relaying messages from something that had gotten inside his head and was using his voice to speak. Sir, with respect, security protocols, Morrison started. The matter is decided, Lieutenant. For a moment, Garrett's eyes cleared and focused, the real Admiral surfacing like someone drowning trying to break the surface. His expression showed fear, confusion, the look of someone fighting a losing battle against thoughts that weren't his own. Then it was gone, replaced by that serene, distant smile. See that it's done. Distribute them appropriately. They want to be appreciated. Hayes didn't like it. I could see resistance in the set of his shoulders. But you don't argue with flag officers about technically legal orders, even when their eyes are begging you to disobey. So they distributed the 17 paintings across the ship like some kind of cultural enrichment program designed in hell. Engineering got the landscape with its perpetually approaching storm. Medical took a religious scene showing angels ministering to plague victims. Operations chose an 18th century cityscape bustling with merchants and carriages. The other departments selected their preferences from what remained: still lifes, portraits, pastoral scenes that seemed to breathe with their own weather. All properly logged, with strict handling instructions and mandatory reports of any unusual observations. Morrison pulled me aside after the distribution meeting. Webb, I need you to do something for me. Unofficial. Sir, keep an eye on those paintings. Anyone reports anything strange, and I mean anything, I want to know immediately. Strange how, sir? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The kind that comes from knowing you've made a terrible mistake but being powerless to fix it. You read that notebook. You know what I'm asking. I did. And I should have watched them like a hawk circling a battlefield. Should have made it my full-time mission to monitor every department, every interaction, every moment those paintings spent in the presence of human beings. But I had regular duties. Watches to stand, equipment to maintain, a war to help fight. The paintings became background noise, just another weird Navy story to file away with all the other inexplicable things that happen when you cram 4,000 people into a floating city and sail it into harm's way. For exactly 72 hours. You know what's worse than having nightmares? It's when everyone on the ship has the same nightmare, on the same night, at the exact same time, featuring details none of them could possibly know about each other's dreams. February 20th, 0600 hours. I woke to the general quarters alarm, which wasn't unusual during combat operations. What was unusual was Chief Kowalski bursting into my berthing compartment with the expression of someone who'd seen the fundamental laws of reality take a coffee break. "Webb, get dressed. Now." This isn't a drill, but it's not an attack either. His voice carried the kind of controlled panic that comes from trying to stay professional when everything you understand about the world has just been turned sideways. Something's wrong with the crew. The medical bay looked like the aftermath of a psychological warfare experiment. 15 sailors from different departments, different watches, different social circles, all presenting identical symptoms: severe depression, acute insomnia, paranoid ideation, and what the chief medical officer was diplomatically calling shared delusional episodes. Except they weren't delusional. They were all saying the exact same thing, using the exact same words. The paintings are empty now. I found Hutchinson first, sitting on an examination table and staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The kid who'd been checking his rifle nervously 3 days ago now looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "Hutch, what happened?" He looked up with eyes that had seen something human beings aren't supposed to see. "I had a dream, Webb." We all did. The exact same dream, down to the smallest detail. "Tell me." "I was standing in a field. The one from engineering's painting. Rolling hills, distant village, storm clouds gathering overhead. But I wasn't alone. There were others with me. Martinez from navigation, Chen from communications, Rogers from supply, bunch of guys from different departments who don't even know each other." He paused, hands trembling slightly. "We were all there, in the painting. Not looking at it, inside it. The grass felt real under our feet. We could smell rain coming with the storm. And we were all trying to get out, trying to find the edge of the frame. But no matter which direction we walked, the landscape just continued. Like the painting had no borders. It was just a dream. No." His grip on my arm was desperate, fingers digging in like claws. When I woke up, I ran straight to engineering. Had to see the painting, had to prove to myself it was just a nightmare. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The landscape is empty, Webb. No village, no hills, no storm clouds. Just blank canvas in a frame." I ran, sprinted through passages that suddenly felt too narrow, nearly collided with 2 ensigns and a petty officer who were having their own whispered conversations about weird dreams and empty paintings. The landscape hung exactly where engineering had mounted it, properly illuminated and secured according to regulations. From a distance, it looked normal. Rolling hills, distant village, storm clouds pregnant with rain. But Hutchinson was right about one crucial detail. It was empty, not blank. The scenery was all there, painted with the same masterful technique we'd admired. But it was abandoned, evacuated, like looking at photographs of Pompeii after the eruption. Everything in place, but you knew with absolute certainty that nothing lived there anymore. The village showed no signs of habitation, no smoke from chimneys, no movement in the streets, no figures in the windows. The storm clouds hung motionless, frozen between one moment and the next, as if time itself had stopped inside the frame. I checked medical next. The religious scene that had shown angels ministering to plague victims now depicted the same setting, but the angels were gone. Only the victims remained, and they weren't being comforted anymore. They were cowering, hands raised to ward off something approaching from outside the visible frame. operations had chosen an 18th century street scene, supposedly showing the bustling commercial district of some European city. Now the streets were empty, carriages abandoned mid-journey, merchant stalls left unattended. In the windows of buildings, if you looked carefully, you could see shadows moving, watching. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't maybe the light's different or perhaps I'm remembering wrong. The paintings had fundamentally changed overnight, and everyone who'd spent extended time near them was experiencing some form of psychological breakdown. Morrison found me documenting the changes in his makeshift office, barely larger than a closet, but it had a door that locked and walls thick enough to muffle conversation. He pulled out a flask that violated about 6 different Navy regulations and took a long pull before offering it to me. "Bourbon, sir?" "Kentucky's finest." And drop the "sir." We're past military courtesy at this point. Another drink, larger this time. "How many affected?" 28 at last count, all reporting variations of the same dream sequence. But Morrison... I paused, trying to find words for something that shouldn't exist. The paintings have changed. Not just empty, transformed. Like someone reached inside them and removed specific elements. I know. Had the dream myself, but mine was different. His laugh carried no humor whatsoever. I wasn't inside a painting. I was standing in front of all 17 of them, hung in a gallery I'd never seen before, and they were looking back at me. Looking? Not the subjects, the paintings themselves. Like the canvases had developed eyes, and they were full web, packed with people, our people. Everyone who'd vanished from the original scenes was crowded into these frames, pressed against the surface like they were trying to break through glass. Before I could respond, the intercom crackled to life with an announcement that made both of us freeze. "Security alert. All personnel to Deck 5, Section C. Medical emergency in progress." Seaman Rogers had tried to destroy the still life in his berthing compartment, used a combat knife, slashing repeatedly at the canvas with enough force to cut through the frame. The painting was completely unharmed, not a scratch on the surface, colors as vibrant as ever. But Rogers's hands were shredded like he'd been fighting something with claws and razors. They'd sedated him heavily, but not before he managed to gasp out words that made everyone in the compartment step backward. "They're coming through tonight. Midnight. All of them at once. The door is almost open." Morrison looked at his watch. 1800 hours. 6 hours until midnight. "We're getting those things off this ship," he said quietly. "Tonight. All of them." "How?" "Admiral's direct orders. Screw the Admiral. I'd rather face a court-martial than whatever's planning to step out of those frames." Morrison assembled his team carefully. Me, Kowalski, Diaz, and Captain Hayes himself. Having the ship's commanding officer involved meant we were either completely insane or facing a threat that transcended normal military hierarchy. "Officially, I know nothing about this operation," Hayes said, securing the wardroom hatch behind us. "Unofficially, those things go overboard in weighted bags before midnight. All 17 of them." But the paintings had developed their own agenda. We started with engineering's landscape, figuring it was the largest and therefore the primary focal point. Kowalski and Diaz lifted it carefully off its mounting brackets, and that's when the screaming started. Not from us, from inside the painting. A sound like wind through a narrow canyon, but underneath the howling were voices, human voices, pleading in languages I didn't recognize, begging in tones of absolute desperation that cut through your chest like frozen needles. The ornate frame became burning hot. Diaz dropped his end with a curse, pulling away hands that showed immediate blistering from contact with metal that had somehow become superheated. "Leave it," Hayes ordered, studying the painting that now seemed to pulse with its own internal light. "Try another one." Medical was worse. The moment we touched the religious scene, every light fixture in the compartment exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. In the sudden darkness, the painting began to glow, soft, sickly green phosphorescence that made everything look drowned and rotting. And in that unholy light, we saw them. The figures that had vanished from the paintings were standing behind the frames, pressing against some invisible barrier, trying to push through into our reality. Their faces were wrong, still recognizably human but stretched and distorted, like someone had grabbed their features and pulled them in directions faces weren't meant to go. Angels with wings that ended in grasping fingers. Plague victims whose sores moved and writhed with independent life. Merchants whose eyes had been replaced with windows showing landscapes of fire and ash. "Jesus Christ," Kowalski whispered, backing toward the hatch. "No," Morrison said grimly, raising his sidearm. "I don't think he's involved in this. You want to know what real terror feels like? It's not jumping at shadows or feeling watched in empty rooms. It's the moment you realize you're completely, utterly screwed, that you've stumbled into something so far beyond your understanding or ability to handle, that your best-case scenario is quick death. 2,330 hours, 30 minutes until midnight. Half the crew was reporting nightmares while fully awake. Shared hallucinations of standing in painted landscapes that stretched beyond the edges of their frames. The other half had barricaded themselves in their berthing compartments, as far from the distributed paintings as the ship's geometry allowed. Admiral Garrett had finally accepted that something was catastrophically wrong, but his solution involved locking down all affected areas and waiting for a psychiatric evaluation team to fly in from Bahrain. Morrison had a more direct approach planned. "That notebook from the Cassandra," he said, pulling out photocopied pages. "There was more. Final entries I didn't report because they seemed like ravings." He'd separated the water-damaged final pages, dried them carefully under controlled conditions. The handwriting was different from the earlier entries. Older, more formal, like something copied from a much older source. The binding of Cassandra's sight. "These frames are doors. These paints are keys. What watches through cannot be freed, unless the watchers become the watched and pay the price that can't be bought. 7 doors need 7 guards, but one door needs but one to ward. The guardian stands where others fall, to keep the hungry from us all." Instructions, I realized, the pieces falling into a pattern I wished I couldn't see. The Cassandra's crew didn't abandon ship. They were pulled into the paintings, became part of them. But someone had to stay behind to maintain the barrier. Stay behind how? By choice. Willing sacrifice. Someone has to take their place in the painted world, so the painted things can't enter ours. Before Morrison could respond, every light on the ship died simultaneously. Nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with multiple redundant electrical systems, and we went dark like someone had thrown a master switch. In that absolute darkness, 17 paintings began to glow with their own light. Emergency power kicked in after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Red lighting bathed everything in the color of arterial blood, and the intercom system erupted with reports from across the ship. Paintings were active everywhere. Crew members reported shadows stepping out of frames, reaching for anyone who came too close. But it was worse than simple manifestation. People were disappearing into the paintings. "Bridge to all hands," Captain Hayes's voice boomed through speakers. "All personnel maintain distance from recovered artwork. Security teams respond to affected areas immediately." But security teams were reporting their own casualties. Each attempt to approach the paintings resulted in personnel being pulled through the canvas surface like it was made of liquid instead of solid matter. Morrison grabbed my shoulder. "Wardroom. That's where this started. That's where we end it." The passages were chaos. Sailors running in all directions, some toward battle stations, others just running from something they couldn't understand or fight. We passed medical and saw Lieutenant Chen standing motionless in front of the religious scene, his hands flat against the canvas surface. But his hands were sinking in, disappearing past the wrist like the painting was quicksand. Kowalski tried to pull him back, but when Chen turned his head, there were no eyes in his sockets. Just smooth skin where his eyes should have been, and when he opened his mouth, painted angels began to fly out. "Leave him," Hayes ordered, as Chen stepped fully into the frame and disappeared. "We can't save everyone." The wardroom had become the epicenter of whatever was happening. All 17 paintings glowed with increasing intensity, and the missing figures were returning. But they were different now, changed by their time in the painted world. They stood at the edges of their frames, pressing outward against barriers that were obviously weakening, and behind them, visible in the backgrounds that should have been empty landscapes and architecture, were our people. Hutchinson walking through painted fields that stretched beyond the frame's borders. Chen kneeling among painted angels that whispered secrets in dead languages. Rogers arranging painted fruit on a table that existed in no earthly dimension. They were becoming part of the artwork, integrating themselves into scenes that would trap them forever. "The barrier's failing," Morrison said, consulting the notebook again. "According to this, someone has to cross over voluntarily, become a guardian on the other side, keep the door locked from within. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's something worse. Eternal duty in a painted hell, making sure nothing escapes." That's when Admiral Garrett appeared in the hatchway, but it wasn't really him anymore. His uniform was perfect, his posture military straight, but his face had been painted. Literally painted with brush strokes visible across his cheeks and forehead, colors slightly off like someone had tried to recreate him from memory. "Gentlemen," he said in a voice that echoed from empty rooms, "I've been waiting for you to understand." Morrison raised his weapon, but Hayes caught the barrel before he could fire. "Admiral, is that really you?" The painted thing wearing Garrett's face smiled, and cracks appeared in the paint around its mouth. "I volunteered, James. Someone had to be first, had to show them the way. The door requires a proper opening ceremony." More figures emerged from the shadows, crew members who'd vanished over the past few hours, but wrong now. All painted, all wearing expressions of serene contentment that was more terrifying than any scream. "The paintings aren't cursed," the Garrett thing continued conversationally. "They're just hungry. Empty for so long, and we're so wonderfully alive, so vibrantly real. They want to be real again, and we want to be eternal, perfect symbiosis." "What happened to the real Admiral?" Morrison demanded. "He's safe." "We're all safe now. In the painted world, time doesn't pass. Pain doesn't exist. Fear is just another color on the palette." It gestured toward the glowing canvases. "Join us. Complete the collection. Become art." The painted crew began moving forward with that same serene expression, and that's when I noticed the portrait from the captain's quarters, the one showing the room we were standing in. There was movement inside it. The figure that had been sleeping in the painted bed was sitting up now, looking directly at us through the canvas surface. "Morrison, look at the portrait." He followed my gaze and went pale. In the painting's version of the wardroom, we were there, all four of us, standing exactly where we stood in reality. But our painted selves were different, wearing the same expression of serene contentment as the approaching crew. Our painted selves were beckoning to us. They're not just trying to pull us in, Hayes realized. They're trying to replace us with painted versions. We go into the frames, they come out into the world. That's when I understood the true horror. This wasn't about trapping people in paintings. It was about invasion. The painted figures wanted to swap places, to experience physical reality while we became eternal prisoners in their two-dimensional world. Part of me wanted to step forward. The painted world looked peaceful. No war, no death, no midnight watches staring at radar screens that might show incoming missiles. Just eternal, painted silence where nothing could hurt you because nothing was real. But Captain Hayes had other plans. "I said I'd bring my crew home safe," Hayes said quietly, looking at each of us in turn. His voice carried the weight of command responsibility, but underneath it was something deeper, a father's love for children he was about to lose. "That's still my intention." Before any of us could stop him, he stepped toward the largest painting, the landscape that had started everything. The painted crew froze mid-step, and the advancing Garrett thing looked genuinely surprised. "Captain, you don't understand what you're—" "I understand perfectly." Hayes's voice carried across the wardroom with absolute authority. "You need someone to cross over voluntarily, become a guardian on the other side, keep the door locked from within." The moment his foot crossed the threshold between frame and canvas, the screaming stopped. Complete, perfect silence fell like a weight, broken only by the gentle hum of emergency power and our own ragged breathing. Hayes stood in the painted landscape, but he remained real, flesh and blood in a world of pigment and imagination. He turned back to face us, and his expression showed both resignation and determination. "The door needs a guardian," he said, his voice echoing strangely from inside the frame. "Someone to keep them in and you out. Someone who chooses to stay and watch." The painted crew was frozen now, caught between dimensions. The Garrett thing flickered like a bad television signal, its painted features running slightly. "You can't hold them all," it protested. "Eventually you'll weaken, and when you do, then I'll deal with that when it happens," Hayes replied. "Go. Get those things off my ship while I can still maintain the barrier." We ran, through passages full of confused crew members who suddenly couldn't remember why they'd been afraid, past medical bays where the affected personnel were sitting up clear-eyed and asking for coffee. The paintings were just paintings again, masterful works of art, but no longer windows to hungry otherworlds. But Hayes remained visible in the landscape, a solitary figure standing eternal watch over hills that would never change, and skies that would never clear. Behind him, barely visible in the painted distance, other figures moved. The Cassandra's crew, the missing admiral, all the souls who'd been pulled into the painted world over the centuries. But Hayes stood between them and the frame's edge, guardian and gatekeeper, keeping the door sealed through sheer force of will. Official report filed February 24th, 1991. 17 pieces of recovered artwork, suspected stolen property, disposed of according to international maritime law. No casualties reported. Minor psychological stress incidents attributed to combat fatigue, resolved through counseling and temporary duty reassignments. Captain Hayes listed as transferred to classified assignment, location undisclosed. His replacement arrived via helicopter with sealed orders and no questions about his predecessor's sudden departure. The Greek vessel Cassandra was found burned to the waterline 3 weeks later, drifting in international waters. Coast Guard investigators ruled it an engine fire. No survivors located, no bodies recovered. I kept one thing from that night, the water-damaged notebook that had warned us about what we were facing. Morrison let me take it before we weighted the paintings and dropped them into the deepest part of the Gulf, where the pressure would crush anything trying to swim back to the surface. I've read that notebook thousands of times over the past 33 years, searching for clues about the true nature of what we encountered. But what haunts me most is a detail I didn't notice until years later. The final entry, written in careful block letters while we were aboard the Cassandra, wasn't in the handwriting of the Greek crew. It was Captain Hayes's writing. "We are in the paintings now. They are on the ship." He'd known. Somehow he'd foreseen what was coming and what it would cost. The notebook had been his way of preparing us, guiding us toward the only solution that could save the ship and crew. I served 6 more years after the Gulf War, never encountering another painting that showed unusual properties. Never had another nightmare about stepping through frames into worlds made of pigment and desperation. But I kept that notebook, and sometimes I'd find new entries appearing in Hayes's careful handwriting. Still on watch, all quiet, the door holds. Then, years later, getting tired, hard to maintain focus, need relief soon, and most recently, just last week. The paint is fading. Some of the prisoners are stirring. If the barrier fails, remember. One must stay so others may leave. One must watch so others grieve. Find someone willing, find someone strong. The Guardian can't hold much longer. So here's why I'm telling you this story. Not for entertainment, not for YouTube views or comment engagement, and not for internet fame or viral videos or, I need to find Hayes's replacement. The door is weakening after 3 decades of constant vigilance. When it opens again, it won't be in some distant war zone where the military can contain the outbreak. It'll be in a gallery, a museum, a private collection, somewhere civilian populations will be exposed to something they can't understand or fight. 17 frames of ancient hunger, looking for new subjects to replace the painted figures that have waited centuries for freedom. And they remember every face they've ever seen, including mine. I still carry the notebook, pages stuck together with blood that never properly dried. The writing appears more frequently now, Hayes's script becoming increasingly erratic as exhaustion takes its toll. Webb, I kept my promise as long as I could. 33 years standing watch. But the painted crew is getting stronger, and I'm getting older. Need you to find my relief. Someone who understands the cost. Someone willing to pay it. Gallery opening next month. Mumbai. Private collector acquired them from a Persian Gulf recovery operation. The frames have been restored, the paintings cleaned and revarnished. They look perfect now. Hungry. They're coming home, Webb, and they remember everyone who ever saw them. Jesus Christ. They're already here. The notebook just wrote itself again as I was finishing this account. Opening night is tomorrow. Find someone, Webb. Find someone who can take the watch, Or find someone who can warn the world, but do it fast. I can feel the door cracking. 33 years is a long time to stand guard alone. If you see a landscape painting featuring a solitary figure standing watch over rolling hills, do not look directly at the guardian. He's still there, still keeping the door locked, but he's fading. And if you find yourself in a gallery where 17 masterpieces are on display for the first time in decades, remember this. Art should be appreciated, but some doors should never be opened. The painted world is always looking for new residents. And once you step inside a frame, you can never step back out.